you are. We are broadcasting from the MA base room at the University for the Creative Arts, which finds itself in Rochester, in Kent, which is in the southeastern corner of the UK. My name is Ulrich Lehmann. I am the MA course leader, and I am trying out this Google Hangout broadcast today in order to tell you a bit about the course and to give you sample presentations of the type of lectures, seminars we do. So the first thing probably is to introduce the environment, to say this is one of our studio spaces. You can see a bit of paraphernalia in the background, and during this live broadcast you will probably hear a lot of noises of students wandering in and out. One of the reasons for this is that in the summer is our final term, and it comes at the end of a term structure that includes taught seminars and lectures, research, but in this summer term it's really about the realization and communication of their final projects. And for this, of course, you have to work long hours. It's a very creative atmosphere, like in any art college in the world, and you will see work actually being done. In this case, behind me, as you can see from dummies, fashion work. As course leader for the MA Fashion, what I basically do is I combine theoretical instructions and contextual research and instructions with practical and design work. So what we're trying to do on the MA, which is probably quite different from a BA, is to work project-based, but at the same time to underpin this with more context, maybe more reflection, maybe more critical thinking than you would necessarily find on an undergraduate course. That doesn't mean that it necessarily results in better work, not always, but you certainly have more time, you have more ability and liberty to work speculative and experimental. The MA course is 1 year, 1 calendar year from September to September, so it gives you ample time to develop something that you might, in a professional fashion environment, might not always experience in the same. It's not a leisurely tempo, but it's a more reflective tempo. So in this respect, the MA Fashion allows you to be free and speculative and experimental with your ideas, but also, and this is where the theoretical conceptual bit comes in, where you try and put it into a context of cultural production, the creative industry, economics, social ideas. So it's looking at a broader spectrum that surrounds your creative practice. In order to exemplify this interplay, if that's a good word, between the theory and the practice, between ideas that surround fashion, but then impact on the making and inform creative practice, I've chosen today to talk to you about a topic that's called bags. And the bags are a visual metaphor, a link, but they also, because they're produced in a certain way, they give you that connection to practice. The way I would like to do this is to say, I'll give an introduction, which I'm doing obviously now. I'll give you some practical information, and then I'll switch to something you might be familiar from a PowerPoint presentation. That means you get slides with text, you get slides with images, you get a link to a video, which I hope, I'm just glancing across to my colleague Simon, who is looking at supervising the idea. Okay, he's just pointing out that's where you, so we go to a website, we look at a commercial website. Once we've done this, and this is very much like a seminar or a live lecture that you would give in the classroom. Once we've done this, I'm happy to answer questions that you might have. As the live broadcast is also available on Google+, on YouTube, on UCA MA2B, which is another social media platform where you can type in your questions. We can, of course, respond to those questions, so you can think about them and then formulate them, type them in, and I can answer them afterwards. We can also suggest that for the next 2 days, 3 days, you can send me questions. again, through the platforms like Google+, YouTube, UCA, MA2B, and I will then write back to you. Because that's exactly the same structure that we have on the MA. If there are questions after a lecture, they don't always come immediately afterwards, but they come after a period of reflection, and thus this might be something that we can do here as well. What else in terms of structure? I mentioned my colleague Simon Pruszak, who is works in the international office at UCA, and the international office deals with things like admissions. So if you have any questions about applications to any of the programs at UCA, those would be fielded by Simon. But Simon has also pioneered this idea of linking with interested parties through a variety of digital media. And I think, although I'm stressing this thing that it is almost like a seminar or lecture, it is, of course, it isn't. You know, it's a different format, it's a different way of communicating. So it feels at the moment quite one-dimensional if you don't have eye contact with your students or responses from them. So it is a slightly different way of presenting ideas. What I meant by comparing it to a lecture and seminar, I think it's the style and the type of contents that we are communicating, which is quite similar to what we would do on the MA course. So if you're interested in studying, let's say, on the MA Fashion at UCA Rochester, this is the kind of things you might come to expect there. Okay, what I would like to do now is to switch to the actual presentation and show you the first slide, which is a bit of a structure, and I will obviously talk over these slides, both the text slides and the image slide. And as you can see, it gives you a bit of a few of the ideas that I would like to talk about in this broadcast, which will roughly be 30 minutes, I think. So first of all, I have to apologize for the title. In academia, you should never make puns, but I was thinking, okay, how can I communicate a particular idea about a connection between fashion practice and other parts of culture through a visual link? And one of the things I could think about is bags. And here you have bags as a visual link and as a connection between aspects of design, especially fashion design, fashion practice, but also the fashion industry, fashion media, and contemporary art. The connection is explored to show cultural and commercial connections. And then these connections are also structural because they go back to aspects of making. And then you have the presentation that we're doing at the moment with the visual as a discussion forum to lead back to creative projects. And this is also the purpose of the seminars and lectures that we do at UCA, insofar that we want to talk about ideas that have not always a direct relation to the fashion industry proper, so we're not just talking about clothes and accessories, we're talking about design and fashion and context. But then it only makes sense, really, to talk about these things if you link back to creative projects by the students. So this is one of the important things. So let's begin with a first image. And the first image is by a Swiss artist. She's called Sylvie Fleury, and it shows, as the title indicates, shopping bags. The sculpture, the installation, dates from 1992. So what you can see here are paper and plastic bags, some of them logoed, some of them not. And you can see that they are arranged in what appears to be a haphazard structure on a wooden floor against a white wall. So you have this typical idea of the white cube in a commercial gallery or in an art space like a museum or cultural institution. Yet the objects that are on display in that space seem very quotidian, you know, everyday objects. But they are, as you can easily see, of course, particular objects of the everyday, namely everyday consumption. So you can see brand names, you can see logos, you can see a small flight case, the red one in the middle that might contain cosmetics. You can see larger shopping bags in the background. And initially, it doesn't really appear as anything special, as if the artist had really modified these objects or had arranged them in such a way that it's deliberately artistic, or seems to provide a type of narrative that might allow you to make connections between the different types of bags, different logos, and so on and so forth. And that, of course, goes back to the tradition of the ready-made. For those of you who are familiar with art history and are interested in contemporary art, the word ready-made, of course, is not going to be anything new. For those of you who don't know what a ready-made is, the ready-made is very much a beginning of the 20th century, a formal avant-garde term that was used by essentially not necessarily art critics, but by an artist himself, Marcel Duchamp, in the beginning of the 1910s, so around the time of the First World War, for an object that is in an unmediated way taken from a practical, functional, commercial background and transported into an art context. His first example was displaying a urinal within a New York gallery. I have another example, which is a snow shovel from 1915, remade in 1963, as you can see in the caption, which has the poetic title "In Advance of the Broken Arm." So an unadulterated, unmediated object that is produced, mass-produced, very important element of the ready-made, and simply, in this case, hung on 2 nails on a white gallery wall, and thus brought from one context into another context. And of course, that is something that Sylvie Fleury does with her bags as well. Only that, of course, here, as I said, it is not the neutral object. If an industrially mass-produced object like Duchamp's snow shovel can be called a neutral object, but it is a logo object. It is not just an object that is within general everyday culture, but, as I said before, in a very particular commercial culture. So, the ready-made, and here's a text slide to allow you to read through these elements on these points that I'm trying to make. The ready-made comes at the end of a process that begins with the establishment of a bourgeois art consumption and production of a market. Now, again, this is a bit of a cliche to talk about bourgeois art consumption, but of course the avant-garde, and especially the formal avant-garde art movements like Dada, Surrealism, Futurism, and so on at the beginning of the 20th century art was very much about establishing a market for art. A market that was not in any way influenced by state sponsorship or commissions, by religious commissions or religious, but was very much a context of consumption. Now, this had been pioneered in the 19th century by the Impressionists and others, but in the 20th century, it becomes a concern of the artist. It's reflecting on the market, reflecting on the context in which art is produced, not just what it reflects in the visual surfaces or in the sculptures that I'm making, but also what does it mean, what are the economic and social structures that produce art, and these are reflected on. And there, the ready-made, because it takes something from the commodity market, from everyday culture that is mass-produced, and bringing it in art context is a very apt example. So, this goes back, as I said, to the second half of the 19th century in Europe. There were related strategies in the production, distribution, consumption of applied arts, and the distinction between applied and fine art, you know, the avant-garde of making high art, so to speak, was lessened, was diminished in the second half of the 19th century, and especially in the beginning of the 20th century. And these, I would argue, this lessening of a distance between applied arts, what we now call design, and fine art, or so-called high art, as it was called then, I would argue comes down to a number of points. One was that there was a move from traditional craftsmanship in the applied arts to more conceptual approaches. This came because a lot of craftsmanship was diminished because of industrialization, especially in Western Europe, but also in Asian countries like Japan, of course in North America and Central America. So craftsmanship was not the only thing that applied, that was distinguishing applied art, but also there was an idea that good design ideas could now be produced, mass-produced, and opened up not just to rich consumers, but to a large range of consumers. But in opening up, in making things more distributable, in making things more easily available, in making things more quotidian, more everyday, a lot of designers felt that something was being lost. The artistry, the artisanal labor, the expertise of the craftsman, the idea of connection to materials, the idea of a connection to an audience, you know, to know whom you're producing for. In fashion, for example, a lot of bourgeois consumers still had a personal relationship with their tailor or their seamstress, where they would take models from high fashion, for example, gave them a fashion drawing or fashion photograph in the latter half of the 19th century and said, can you make me something like this? And then it would be a matter of a dialogue. All of these personal connections, all of this idea of craftsmanship was getting lost slightly. So designers, artisans, applied artists had to think of new strategies. And one of these things was, of course, to look at the applied arts in general and to look at where their position in culture was. And that very quickly made them look at fine art and say, okay, what's our relation to fine art? What's our relation to high art? Can we share similar conceptual approaches? Can we share thinking about where we make things, how we make things, in what context we make things? So this went both ways. So fine art also began to think about their context for production and consumption, because it wasn't just painting that was promoted at the turn of from the 19th to the 20th century and at the beginning of the 20th century. As we saw in the Duchamp snow shovel, it was also sculptures with industrially made pieces, not always just ready-mades, but using modern techniques, using modern materials and so on. So the fine arts also started thinking about, how do we produce things? We're not just painters anymore, we also do other stuff. How do we do this? Who is consuming it? So there was, on both sides, in the fine arts, there was this idea that, okay, we can now use industrial material, industrial production processes, and still call it fine art. On the other hand, the craftsmen, the designers who were working in applied arts, started thinking, hold on, if there's so much mass-produced stuff around, how do we distinguish ourselves? You know, maybe I should make myself more like an artist in order to separate myself from the mass production. And for me, a lot of the tradition of the haute couture in France, you know, the high fashion, comes out of this notion of trying to be an artist. You know, suddenly the couturier was working in his little studio and tried to affect, also in terms of look and the way he was promoting his fashion. He was talking to clients, not as a two-way communication, but basically dictating styles and so on to it. This development of haute couture in fashion was one of these tendencies that showed the designer as the artist in order to set himself, sometimes herself, more often himself, apart from the mere artisans or the people who were mass-producing designed objects. Applied arts also thought about their emancipatory function. They were thinking, and this comes to a head also in the avant-garde of the 20th century, like Bauhaus and so on, they were thinking about what can good design do for the social good. You know, what can it have a function that liberates people using design? So there were a lot of tendencies in the late 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century, that thought about the position of art versus design and of design versus art. And within this, obviously the ready-made, this direct taking of a designed, mass-produced object and putting it in the context of contemporary art was quite instrumental. Now, I want to come to the actual topic that I presented to you, namely bags. The first example I want to show you is one that you're all familiar with, either in its original shape in a very exclusive retail environment, as an image on in the fashion media, or even as a mass-produced replica. Not necessarily a fake, although Louis Vuitton, of course, would call it a fake. But these bags exist in so many different copies, and you will see how important the term copy is for the argument that I'm trying to make through this bag, that I'm sure you've all seen them in one form or another. So this is the Keep All, and this is a particular one. It's the Keep All 60s, which denotes the dimension of the bag. It's the monogram version, which again you're all familiar with because it's the most visually and the identifiable product range for Louis Vuitton, because obviously it carries the logo as a pattern. That's something we're going to talk about in a moment. As you can see, different types of leather are used. The leather production for Louis Vuitton has a long-standing tradition, goes back to the 19th century, goes back to this idea of craftsmanship. Again, I think we will come back to when we look at a particular video at the end of the presentation. So within the actual manufacture of it, there's nothing that really distinguishes the Louis Vuitton Keep All. It is more something that is distinguished by the way it is communicated and represented anew in different ways. Of course, the initial building of the bag, the initial design for the bag, the type, as I said, the type of metal, the type of leather is being used, is very exclusive and is very heavily protected, so patents and particular copyright protections within the Louis Vuitton group. But because we're so familiar with it, and because the leather treatment is now very much industrialized and mass-produced, there is nothing special you would necessarily say about this bag, except for, of course, the finishing, the quality of the materials, and so on and so forth. But it is something, as I said, that we're all familiar with in one form or another, often through copies. So how do you distinguish something that has been around for a while, that has an established tradition, and needs to be renewed, needs to be made into something that becomes a new object, a fashionable object that can be consumed within a fashion cycle, that can be renewed? And in order to show you this, what I want to present is one particular example, and I hope this now comes up as a... No, it doesn't. So we'll see whether we can now go back to, in order to, we need to paste in the hyperlink, if you bear with me for 1 second. And then I'll show you the website. And should come up with, let's say, it's loading. I hope you can see what we can see. And I will now go around and pick one particular one here. And I keep the cursor on it so that you can see it will move from left to right. So this is the website for Louis Vuitton icons. And you can see the bag that is just moving from left to right through this little screen is one of an example of, as you can see, 9 boxes. You can't see the top 3, but initially 9, but there will be more added to it and have been added to it. This particular bag, again linking to our theme, linking to the focus for this presentation, is again a development by the Swiss artist Sylvie Fleury, whom I showed the shopping bag sculpture from 1992 to you at the very beginning. And it is, as you can see, a material transposition of the particular bag. Before I describe the materials that are used in producing this sculpture or commodity object, I mean, I'll leave it up to you how you view this, how you see this. I wanted to read you a quote from this website, from Louis Vuitton icons. And the quote says, "Fashion and art go hand in hand. They are intertwined and reinforce each other beautifully. In the spirit of openness that has always characterized Louis Vuitton's relationship with its age, the Espace Louis Vuitton, inaugurated in January 2006, extends invitation to exponents of a wide range of cultural and artistic disciplines, as well as architects, designers, writers, sculptors, photographers, video artists, and scenographers. In the exhibition, Icons, and this is the title of the website as well, 9 designers and artists with remarkable track records pay homage to iconic Louis Vuitton bags. Now, so far so good in terms of promotional speed and PR language. What I think is noticeable about this is that fashion and art go hand in hand. That this is a very, very important way in which this goes, that I assume since this website was inaugurated in 2006, this was a text that was written around 2005, 2006. So it comes at the end of a development where art and fashion have been brought into a certain proximity of it. What is interesting here with this hand-in-hand quote is that they're not one claims to be the other. Because one of the slightly pretentious and often quite fatal for a brand claims is that a particular design project is art. When there is a certain conceptual reflection on part of the design, when there's a certain price point, when there's a certain exclusivity of distribution, some brands, often ill-advisedly, in the 1990s more often than not, but also in the beginning of the noughties of 2000, claimed that their design project, their applied arts, was in fact contemporary art, was like art. And that has often backfired on them, because people are saying, no, of course it isn't. You know, because it's available in retail environment, it is mass-produced, it is, you know, it doesn't even make the conceptual claim of a ready-made. It just claims to be art because you think you can then sell it at a premium. Now, Louis Vuitton, obviously in 2006, is clever enough to have remarked that these strategies don't always pay off. So they are now talking that art and fashion go hand in hand. They're not alike. They're not even on the same level, but they go hand in hand. So they share certain values of maybe production, of distribution, of aesthetics, maybe of ethos. Difficult to maybe insinuate this when we're talking about commodities, fashion bags, but that they are relations between art and fashion. So that one doesn't claim to be the other, but they are relations. So I think that is quite important. And then there's also this idea of Louis Vuitton's relationship with its age. And this is when I said you have to update these bags. You have to include them into a fashion cycle. So this relationship with its age, basically, if you transform this into commercial language, means you update the materiality, you update the look in order to be able to sell it again as a fashionable item. So if we now take a closer look at this Louis Vuitton bag that Sylvie Fleury transformed into an art, we can see that it is galvanized. It's metal. So what happened here was that the relatively pliable material of the leather was transformed into something hard, unpliable, unmovable, stiff. It became fixed in a very literal sense. So something that could be used, that had a certain function, the keep all, where you can open the hold all, you can put stuff in it, you can close it again, you can carry it with you, is transformed through the material by increasing the weight, galvanizing it, so reducing the function of opening it and closing it, and the fact that it is now a hard, a shiny surface that doesn't necessarily invite you to have the same tactile and olfactory, you know, the term of smell of leather, relationship with a Louis Vuitton bag. Leather, obviously, as we know, as a material ages. Galvanized leather, in this case, a metal version of the bag, doesn't age. So suddenly, the sculpture goes away from a lot of the original ideas that were put into the object through the material of leather. So if you transpose the leather into metal, into a metal sculpture, then suddenly the bag becomes an object. Whether it's still a commodity is another matter, because of course this is a one-off that sits in the Espace Louis Vuitton in Paris, and it's something you can see on a pedestal very much, because it's filmed in this Espace, as a one-off sculpture. Now, in order to understand, I might now, I'm looking to Simon to go out of the web link and go back to our presentation, and I show you something else. I show you a series of sculptures from 1994 and 2000, and that is something that an American artist, Jeff Koons, proposed. And these are big sculptures that you can see installed in this particular photo on the roof of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. Do we need to bring this up? Sorry, I'm just referring to Simon, whether we need to bring it up. Yeah, it will work like that. So at the moment, my screen is smaller than it was before, but I hope you can see it as a full screen. So this is Jeff Koons' balloon dogs from 1994 to 2000, and as I said, installed on the roof of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York in 2008. So you can easily see through these sculptures a particular type of material transposition that has a tradition in contemporary art. And my argument would be that Sylvie Fleury's metallizing the bag, making the bag, the Louis Vuitton keep-all, into a metal sculpture, stands in this tradition, pioneered by contemporary artists like Jeff Koons. So what you can see with this massive 3-4 meter high balloon sculptures is that a pliable, soft material like the latex outline of a balloon is suddenly becomes a massive galvanized sculpture, you know, made out of epoxy aluminum, then lacquered and polished to a high grade. So the transposition is not just in dimension, which of course in Sylvie Fleury's case is not, because it is exactly in the same dimension. So there maybe the original idea of the ready-made, that you take a commodity object and you bring it one-to-one in an art context, is more preserved compared to the Jeff Koons balloon sculptures. But you see the same transposition happening, that a material transposition, a fixing, a monumentalization, a kind of making something static, making something into a large, enormously heightened sculpture, which also might be a reflection on the age, you know, this idea that everything has to be bigger and better in order to have more cultural value, more financial value, more material value. This tradition of monumentalizing small objects, banal objects, is something that unites a lot of tendency in contemporary art. There will be another tendency where we're going to talk about, which comes from Japan, which stands very much in this tradition, and we're going to talk about this in a minute, also in conjunction to Louis Vuitton. What I want to show you here is just that Sylvie Fleury's making a sculpture out of the keep-all is part of an artistic tradition. Now, so far, so good. This, you could all say, well, this is probably a mechanism that is not unfamiliar to us. What is interesting then to me is the notion that, do we need to go onto this? Yeah. So you see me for a moment, but we'll go back to the presentation now, and I'll show you something that is quite particular to this case study, namely that you have the notion of a keep-all, a leather bag by Louis Vuitton. You have the notion of the metal sculpture by Sylvie Fleury as part of an extended tradition within contemporary art of the 1990s. But in addition, you now have something else. You have a hybrid. Here is a Louis Vuitton Speedy Miroir, which is also a particular line for Louis Vuitton. The Speedy is the smaller bag. It's smaller than the keep-all. Again, it's a format as a mixture between a handbag and a keep-all for ladies. That format is familiar to you, but in this case, it's denoted as a miroir, as a reflective surface. And it has exactly the same metal surface than Sylvie Fleury's icon bag had, only that this is a real bag. This is galvanized leather. This is not a metal surface. This is not polished aluminum, epoxied, and so on. This is actual leather with a metal surface. And it was done in an edition of 100 in 2009, so 3 years after Sylvie Fleury realized the icon for Louis Vuitton. And you could argue that it is a development of this idea of metallizing, of providing a shiny surface, a reflective surface, a mirrored surface, this is why it's called miroir, to a leather bag, which was initiated by a contemporary artist, Sylvie Fleury, who was very familiar with bags, as we saw in her sculpture from 1992, so had an affinity to fashion. So she worked for Louis Vuitton, and Louis Vuitton then took her visual idea as part of the contemporary art movement, as I demonstrated with Jeff Koons, and made it back into the commercial environment of the actual bag production. And this galvanizing leather is obviously something that some of you might be familiar with, but it's quite a laborious process, because you have to imbue the surface of the leather with a sheen, with a reflective surface that nevertheless works with the pliability, with the stretchability, with the character of the leather as being something that is moving. And to imbue a natural organic hide worked on, obviously as leather, with an industrial hard surface, that bringing together of two materialities is quite complex. Louis Vuitton managed this. It's a very, very expensive process, and the edition of 100 is not just in order to denote this bag, this Speedy Miroir, as a very particular exclusive item, commodity, which of course it is as well, but it's also because it is such a laborious and expensive construction that a limited edition was the only one that is really commercially viable to them. And you could argue that probably the price that was put on these things, because they were collector's item basically given to collectors rather than actually appearing in any of the shops for everyday retailers, that this price point, which I must confess I don't quite know where it was, still incurred a loss for Louis Vuitton. So it was the materiality, the material production didn't really find its equivalent in the value, the commercial value of the bag. But it was an experiment derived from the modification, the transposition that the contemporary artist Sylvie Fleury had proposed to Louis Vuitton. So this back and forth is quite an interesting element that I think is worth preserving when we're thinking about bags. But now there's another way of talking about the notion of bags, and it comes again, we will see, is in exactly the same commercial environment, but it will be. Can I go onto the slide and then go like this? Yeah. So I was just asking Simon, because it's easier to be on the presentation like this. I don't think it makes any difference to you, and it does? It does. Okay, so we had to go back to this format. So I'm sorry for a slight hiccup. I hope you can also hear me talking over the slides. So the second example, and you see this slide, might initially not having anything to do with bags, but I assure you, as you will see in a second, it's still exactly with the same environment, but it's now trying to make a different point. It is talking about context, it's talking about environments. So we're talking still materiality, we're still talking the production of objects, but we're not necessarily talking about one object and a particular transposition from one material to another. Now we're talking about transposition of ideas, of maybe, in a very modern commercial parlance, of logo, of commercial identities, of maybe a corporate identity for a company, if that's not saying too much or is not too grand a statement. So, and this story begins with an exhibition by a Japanese artist, I'm sure familiar to lots of you, Takashi Murakami, and it's a retrospective, the first ever in a Western context, at the Museum of Contemporary Art, MoCA, in Los Angeles in 2007. And you see an installation shot. I'll give you another installation shot here. So we go back to the first one. Now, Murakami had done a curated show at MoCA in 2002. Sorry, correct myself, in 2000. And this show in 2000 that Murakami curated, he contributed works to it, but he also selected other artists and put them into a particular context as a curation within this museum. He called at that time Superflat. And Murakami is one of the prime exponents of a superflat. You can look up the term superflat. There are other, Yoshiniro Noru and other people working at the crossroads between commercial pop culture, anime, manga, advertising, pop culture, pop music, pop videos, design, and art production. So the idea that a lot of critics have looked at Murakami and said he's like the Andy Warhol of Japan, in this relationship might be quite apt, but because you could say here's somebody who takes the very latest, the very newest, the trendiest examples of commercial culture, of visual culture, of pop culture around him, and builds this into an art world. And you can see from the slides that it goes across ideas: painting, sculpture. We just lost the screen, I think. So we go back to this. Again, soliciting Simon's help here. So you can see we have large ornamental sculptures, we have wallpapers, we have sculptures on top of the wallpapers, but we also have more orthodox things like paintings, sculptural assemblages in the middle. And these were also presented in a gallery space with music, videos, moving images, and so on and so forth. So this notion of Murakami's art and superflat, by an extension, this art movement, is that you have a particular visual style, almost like a designer, and you bring it across different disciplines. The artist is not vetted to one particular technique or materiality. He or she is not like an impressionist painter that only puts paint to canvas, or like a contemporary musician who makes a composition, a musical score, but now you can walk across disciplines. Like Duchamp's ready-made, this idea of commercial production, mass production comes into it. And indeed, people like Murakami, Warhol before him, have factory-style production studios where they are only involved in coming up with the visual ideas, coming up with the icons, to use the Louis Vuitton, Sylvie Fleury vocabulary. And then they have a team of, in Murakami's case, over 100 people in Tokyo, realizing these ideas across a whole range of media, a whole range of materials, a whole range of forms of presentation. So this is the background to Murakami's installation in the MoCA in Los Angeles in 2007. And so Superflat was quite a successful show in 2000. The MoCA asked him back for a single retrospective one-man monographic show in 2007. And these are the results. Here are the two installation shots that I have for you. I also have something else. I have the museum store at MoCA. So again, you're all familiar with this and you wonder why I'm showing you this. I think one of the reasons is that in this case, between the installation shot in the gallery space and the museum shop, there isn't that much of a difference. You see the same objects, only that they're no longer in the exclusive environment of the art museum where, you know, look but don't touch, you will never be able to afford this, this belongs to a very rich private collectors and so on, so it's something for you to admire. And the retail space in the museum store where you can then purchase this is diminished. That's a particular thing to Superflat. They say initially there is no real difference between the objects we made for art consumption and the things that you can take home and have on your desk, almost like a designer. You know, Philip Stark would be a good example who, when he was asked to do, as a product designer, a solo show at the Centre Pompidou, for example, said, I'm not going to put anything into the show because all the stuff you can anyway buy in a retail space, so why do you need my stuff in a museum? And he actually closed the museum for the duration of his exhibition as a very grandiose, very demonstrative gesture. So what you do as an artist and what you do as a product designer, what you do within a commercial environment for everyday consumption, and what you do within the art environment as a particular form of cultural consumption is narrowed. In the 20th century and the 21st century, the two things come together. Now, we know this from these retail stores in a museum store that adapt to whatever exhibition there is. So 2007, nothing new, but now comes the novelty. As part of the exhibition of Louis Vuitton, of Takeshi Murakami, sorry, this was a lapse, Takeshi Murakami at the Mocha in Los Angeles in 2007, you had a Louis Vuitton store inside Mocha. And here you have a concept development that Louis Vuitton did for the store. Here is a live shot during the exhibition when people are not, and this is important to emphasize, they're not in the retail space. They're not in a museum store. They are in the gallery space. So we go back to the gallery space. So imagine you go from one room to another to a third. You can see that the floor is slightly different, you know, so that is also part of the Louis Vuitton conception. But you are still in the museum. So you're wandering through exhibition spaces, expecting to be confronted from the movement of one room to another with yet another art installation, with something by Murakami, by the Superflat movement, that you can consume as art. Suddenly, you find yourself in this, in a Louis Vuitton store. So why did that happen? One of the reasons for this is, of course, this conceptual narrowing by the Superflat movement, especially by Murakami, between commerce and art. This deliberate exposure of saying, well, a lot of the art that we produce is produced with the same material, the same techniques that we produce designed objects, fashion objects. And so conceptually, I want to bring the two together. I want to show you that there is essentially no difference in the way we consume art in consuming objects. We will talk about whether this is actually a genuine sentiment, whether it's an argument that can actually make. We come to this in a bit. However, this is demonstratively shown here through this move from one gallery to another, from an installation to a store. But there is also, and this is maybe where you begin to question this conceptual proximity, this conceptual statement of narrowing the distance between art and commerce, between design, fashion, and contemporary art. Where you begin to question this is if you realize that, of course, Murakami works for Louis Vuitton. Murakami was tasked in 2005 very much in the spirit of this Louis Vuitton being within contemporary life, renewing their works within contemporary culture, being part of, I'm just looking back at the quote that they had on their website, where they said, relationship with its age. So obviously this is something that Louis Vuitton is very interested in. If you work within the fashion industry, this idea of being current, being at the forefront, not necessarily the forefront in terms of avant-garde, but being at the forefront of trends, of movements, of visual styles, is crucial in order to sell your stuff. So Louis Vuitton's relationship with its age in 2005 took the form of them commissioning Takeshi Murakami to come up with a new visual image for Louis Vuitton. And now comes the clever bit, and this diminishes in no way the effect of Murakami as an artist, whatever you think about it, and we will talk later a bit about what his standing in the art world actually became after this exhibition in 2007. What you have to appreciate, what was very clever, is the simplicity, yet the innovation that Murakami discussed with Louis Vuitton in terms of changing visual language. He kept all the elements of the monogram series that I showed you with this keep all at the very beginning, and just transformed them into what he called a multicolore, a multicolor scheme. So suddenly he introduced new colors on a white leather background. Not just leather, in fact, again, when I talked about being able to work across a variation of media, of materials, of techniques, here is another Louis Vuitton bag designed after the color scheme of Takeshi Murakami in this kind of fake fur, a kind of cut pile of synthetic fibers that allows you to give this very, very sensual relationship to a surface. That's also why Matt and Marcus's photo here of the woman clutching the bag almost like a blanket, a security blanket, if not a sexual partner. You see that the kind of tactile relationship between the material and the body is something that was something that Murakami was interested in. So here, the cold, hard leather is transformed into this cut pile of synthetic fur that you can sort of smother over your body. But the important thing with the multicolore is that you can see that the same color scheme you can apply to fake fur, you can apply it to leather and so on. And that was the clever bit, because in a very economical way, just by changing the colors, Louis Vuitton could keep to more or less their entire product line with some departures, but essentially keep to everything that they've done, but produce them again in this multicolored function. And it did wonders to their sales. It did wonders to their exposure in Asia. So it was, from a commercial standpoint, a very successful collaboration that continues to this present to the present day. So which again is evidence of how successful this has been for Murakami and for Louis Vuitton indeed. So this is the point where you realize that the integration of the store, the Louis Vuitton store, into the exhibition space of LA MoCA was not just an accidental one-off conceptual gesture, but had a very real commercial basis, had a pre-existing connection, 2 years hence, 2005, and of course also implied a lot of other commercial and economic decisions that were taken around this collection and this exhibition of Takashi Murakami at MoCA. Now, for this particular one-man show that Murakami had in 2007, MoCA was afforded an enormous sponsorship by Louis Vuitton. Marc Jacobs, who had been recently appointed as creative director for Louis Vuitton, came, did a lot of photo calls, did a lot of, had a lot of exposure together with Takashi Murakami. On YouTube, you can find videos of them being interviewed within the exhibition space and so on. So all of this was part of an extended commercial strategy. And when I said before that it was not without its problems, that you can question the conceptual stringency, the ethos, maybe the artistic and aesthetic thinking behind this, then this is indeed what people had done. And MoCA, if this is a proper way of describing it, suffered, or has suffered, ever since this 2007 exhibition. It was seen in a bad way, not in a good way, as a landmark exhibition, where the interaction of commercial sponsorship, of product placement, of commodity culture, and contemporary art became too close. The proximity was lessened. The distance was erased, and that is not something, as I said at the beginning, art, contemporary art, fashion, and design are actually mutually interested in. They like the connection, but when the connection becomes too intense, when the proximity is erased, then becomes a problem. And this is why I thought the Louis Vuitton quote at the beginning, fashion and art going hand in hand, is fine. Hand in hand as a metaphor might work, and embrace a union, a direct intercourse, that is problematic. Because then both fields within the cultural hierarchy are losing their position, and then it becomes really problematic. So when Takashi Murakami does things for Louis Vuitton, these limited organizers that were on sale in the store, you can see the monogrammed bags in the background on the neon lit shelves there. You can't see the organizers, but the organizers were a smaller thing that was put into both the museum store, confusingly, as well as into the retail store. So there are two different sale points for these things. But these were the things where then suddenly a motif from an artwork appeared on a monogrammed Louis Vuitton product that was also part of the commercial production line of Louis Vuitton, that wasn't done exclusively just for Mocha, but then was on sale in all the retail stores around the world, all the Louis Vuitton stores around the world. Then here, in these instances, the connection became problematic and became too close. I'll show you something else, because I don't just want to devalue the notion of, sorry, that was jumping one too far. So we'll go to one of the videos, maybe the second one only, because I don't want to detain you too long. And it's a video production that Takeshi Murakami has done for Louis Vuitton. And we look at this video. I think it's about 2 minutes. It's called Superflat. So after the movement that he, in a way, coined in 2000, and that became a household name within contemporary art as a movement. And it shows you a particular video, some 5 minutes, I think. So we'll watch through this, and then I'll discuss it afterwards. Enjoy.
You see it only if you click on the link.
So you have to look on the link now. Is the link visible to? Okay, so you can see the link now. So please, if you can, go to the link and see the video. And because it's 5 minutes long, I don't necessarily want to talk through it, because also when you go to the link, you, on your computer, you will hear, or whatever, with a tablet or a smartphone that you're using, you will hear the music that goes with this. And of course, this is all part of the extended strategy. So maybe I should be quiet for the 5 minutes. I'll let you find the link and go through it. And then when the video is finished, I'll come back to our discussion. Or whatever, with a tablet or a smartphone that you're using, you will hear the music that goes. Mm-hmm.
Because lots of people want to reject it. Maybe some of them will go for this skills thing. But where you want to put that at the end of your table, it's going to look like a dog's breakfast, because you have this whole way, and then you have like a computer kind of thing. Yeah. It's going to look bad. It's true. It is. Think about it. You know, it's kind of like, and then you're going to have to bend down a little bit on the screen.
Sorry?
Screen should be a little bit sort of, you know.
Then you can hear that.
A nice level or projected. Just a discussion. I'm just saying it's going to be nice if you have a tabletop and then you have to see it. You know, and if I'm supposed to walk around the table, how many people are going to click on the table or in the department? How is your dinner table? Can you see it? You see, and now you're going to have a one of them. So lucky. So nice.
So I start talking again. We'll go back to the slide so they can see. You see two links here. The bottom one was the one from 2006, Superflat monogram. The top one is a different Louis Vuitton video, which I would also encourage you to see. This is more about the notion of making, the tradition, the crafted tradition of Louis Vuitton that I talked about earlier, but it is not something that we necessarily need to look at now. It's something for you to peruse, and it's almost in the same vein as the second one. What I wanted to show is, because despite the fact that there was a lot of concern about putting Takashi Murakami into a contemporary art environment, that there were concerns about the way in which the proximity, as I called it, between art and design, art and fashion, something that is meant to be eternal and have abstract values, and something that is very transitory, like fashion, and has very temporary values, something that is not meant to be commercial, which of course it is. Art consumption is very much about money, but ostensibly it is not. It is about aesthetic enjoyment. And something like design or fashion, which is very much about commodities, expressively so, that proximity between these two camps or these two fields was lessened. That these were seen as problems. That should not deter from the fact that Murakami is a very clever producer. As a video producer, he's done Kanye West videos. Good Morning is by him. He's worked for Issey Miyake Men with Tanizaki together in 2000. So he has a background in being able to move between a contemporary art field and a design field. So his skill is, to me, is not something that needs to be questioned. And in fact, I would argue that this video from 2006, entitled Superflat Monogram, so bringing together the Superflat art movement and the monogram, as in the monogram series by Louis Vuitton, is a very, very clever product. And I leave it to you to analyze for yourself when you see the video once or twice, all the different elements that come into it. You know, the familiar narrative of Alice in Wonderland, sort of going through a portal into a fantastic world and then returning later with a little memento of this world. The very clever way in which the newly inaugurated retail space of Louis Vuitton on the Ginza in Japan by Herzog and de Meuron, the guys who built the Tate Modern in London, for example, how that was used as a framing device at the beginning of the video and at the end of the video, the way in which social media, in this case, the kids having smartphones and being able to Instagram, send images to each other, and thus keep this interest in Louis Vuitton in monograph alive, ostensibly, and here I think becomes an interesting critical bit, ostensibly not by showing a bag or showing commodity, but showing this little cuddly toy. And if you were to be critical about this, it's quite a devious thing to put these prepubescent children, who, if you look at the video, are probably denoted to be 10, 11, something like this. So very much before they become teenagers, and teenagers obviously are the ones that are able to or are seen to be okay with consuming a particular kind of fashion, that these 10, 11-year-old children are already meant to be familiar with Louis Vuitton, knowing where the store is and so on, and being, I sort of hasten to use the word, but it's a very apt word, being groomed as consumers, being already exposed to the importance of attaching value to a logo by Louis Vuitton. And then when they are old enough to consume these things, either through money of their parents, their friends, their family, or their own money, when they're a bit older, to actually then buy these things by themselves, not just to covet them or stand outside the shop, but actually go inside the shop. Which is a clever bit, because the girl doesn't go into the shop. You know, that would be a kid in a Louis Vuitton retail space on her own, would be a bit odd. So it's very carefully controlled. Nevertheless, the message is obvious. You know, you should be a consumer by Louis Vuitton, an aspirational one from an early age, until you then have the means, the social position, the money, the cultural knowledge, the experience, the living in an urban environment where there is a Louis Vuitton retail store. Until you have all these things together, then you can consume the commodity. Maybe this is a bit cynical of thinking about a video like this, and you could say that anime in Japan has traditionally used this image of the child, woman, the girl that looks prepubescent, isn't always prepubescent, but looks like a little child as a main character. That is obviously very much in the tradition of anime and some manga. So it's not surprising that Murakami, being exposed to this tradition and working with this tradition, uses a tiny little girl, as a protagonist. But you could argue that there's also something that is a bit more extensively planned about this in the context of consumption. So, but all of this, again, maybe I'm moving too far away from the visual impact and the commercial value and the inspiration and the design excellence of this video, which is something that I wanted to talk about, because it needs to be applauded. It is a very clever bringing together of different environments. And talking of environments, this is the last slide I want to show to you before we come to the final discussion, is the interior decoration for a Tokyo boutique in spring 2009. And if you permit me, I'll go back to the installation at Mocha in 2007. Look at it, you know, look at the way in which the sculpture is produced. And then we go back to two interior shots of the boutique in Tokyo, featuring the cuddly toys that you just saw in the video, but also featuring variations of the wallpaper, variations of the sculptures of Murakami exhibitions, only now, not just through Murakami's visual language, influenced through Murakami's visual language, born out of Murakami's visual imagination, but out of the collaboration with Louis Vuitton, featuring not just the flowers, not just featuring the coloring scheme that you can see maybe in the art installation in 2007, but rendering exactly the same scheme, the same environment within a retail context with the Louis Vuitton logo. Still hidden, still quite concealed, but obvious to everybody who's been exposed to them. So this is where it is not just the material transposition, as in Sylvie Fleury's bag, but the environment, the context between art and design that is imposed back and forth, and that is a fluctuating and flickering oscillation between the two poles, between the two fields, between the two structures of art and design, of contemporary art and fashion, that informs these environments and these visual solutions. And this is the example I want to end on, and maybe initiate a discussion where you can think for yourself, maybe through questions that you want to pose me, or through discussions that you want to have with others, about what this proximity says. Again, art and design, it is not something where there needs to be a fear of touch, and you don't need to be a purist or reductionist about one or the other, and saying, well, contemporary art needs to be preserved, contemporary design needs to be preserved, and Simon just comes back to, so you can actually see me initiating the final discussion, which is a nice thing. Thank you, Simon. So where the proximity is something that you have to evaluate for yourself. Do these fields need to be preserved in a reductionist purist manner? Contemporary art is contemporary art, should not touch fashion. Fashion is fashion, should not touch. Contemporary art can maybe take ideas from contemporary art and bring them, use them, but should not aspire to be art. Art should not be, in a way, soiled or dirtied or in a way prostitute itself by going too close to design. These are arguments that I think you need to decide for yourself. However, where it becomes interesting is if you look at visual solutions, if you look at media, if you look at material solutions, and you question, where do they come from? How do these relationships, these interactions come from? So in Sylvie Fleury's case, this idea of using leather, rendering it into a sculpture, and then the sculpture being made in turn again into a galvanized leather bag. In Murakami's case, the art installation going through different phases and ending up as a retail installation with similar motifs, similar materials, similar visual and spatial solutions. That's where I think it becomes interesting. And this is not putting a value on one or the other, as I said before, but it is inquiring in a more neutral and objective way what that might mean to your own production. You know, so if you're a creative person, if you work within the arts, either actually producing artworks, if you work within design and you want to work within a design context, a fashion context, you're making clothes, you're exposing yourself to fashion media. If you want to do this, then I think it can be important. I say it's not crucial or imperative, but I think in my view, it can be very important to know about these relationships and to investigate them on a material level in a really detailed manner, not just the surface of it, but really trying to find out about the context in which they were produced in order to learn something about your new practice. And again, then I come back to what does the MA Fashion at UCA Rochester wants to do. This is exactly an example of what we want to do. We give examples, and this is done in courses and lectures around the world, but what we feel is important is to investigate closely these links and not to stay within a discipline just like fashion, but also to know a lot about contemporary art, to know a lot about contemporary music, to know a lot about contemporary video production, to really investigate materials, techniques, and so on, in order to learn how these things are produced, so that you can inquire in a very substantial and detailed manner into these relationships, and then, this is the important bit, use them for your own practice. And this is one of the things that we hope we can impart on the students. And in the past, our results have borne this out, that if you know about these connections in a detailed manner, then it actually benefits your practice and makes you a more interesting, rounded, and creative person. Although this might be quite a grandiose statement to say when you come out of this course, you are a better creative person, but you're certainly exposed to more links, to more connections, as within these two examples. And that hopefully helps you in making and in communicating your work. So, thank you very much for listening. I come again to this link and saying that the live broadcast is available on Google+, on YouTube, and on UCA's own site called UCA MA2B. And I'd be happy to look at them, maybe give you 5 minutes now if you have any immediate questions that you want to reflect on and type down, and then we can continue talking about them. So would we come? I'm turning to Simon now. Would we come back in 5 minutes? We would take a break and then come back in 5 minutes. Yeah, and so you can type questions now if you have them, and send them through these 3 platforms: Google+, YouTube, UCA MA2B, and I'm happy to answer them now within a time lapse of 5 minutes. But also, as I said before, please feel free to post questions afterwards, and I'm happy within the next few days, if you reflect on these things, to also answer these questions in writing them to you. So, thank you very much for listening, and see you in a bit, I hope. Bye. Okay, so we had a short break in order to allow people to post questions. So what I would like to invite you, if you see this on any of the platforms like Google+, YouTube, you say MA2B, and you have any questions, you know, if you watch this not live but as a recording, but then it's still something you're interested in, please post your questions and I'll endeavor to answer them. Maybe we give a time frame of the next 5 days, the next week, and within that week I will come back to you any questions you might want to post. The platforms again, Google+, YouTube, UCA MA2B, and it remains me to say thank you very much for your attention and have a good day. Bye-bye.